I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
And Noah builded the altar before the Lord, that altar which Adam had builded in the time when he was cast forth from the Garden of Eden, and had offered an oblation upon it, and upon it had Cain and Abel offered their oblations. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. As always, we are greatly honored to have you join us in fellowship this evening. We will be continuing our Genesis Revisited series, and Rob, again, is co hosting with me. Rob, are you there, brother?
I am here, Zen. How are you?
I'm good, man, and I'm excited to continue with the series. It's great fun to look at all of these other manuscripts and to bring in all this additional information for people to consider.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. Of course, we had a little difficulty with my show going live last week, but I edited it and it ran last night on TFR, but I uploaded it. I think it was on Sunday or something like that. And it's kind of interesting just kind of going through it again, last week's study, because we ended in Joshua chapter 5, and I had rushed to get it read through, right before the end of the show, and we made some brief commentary on it, but I'm excited to continue diving back in and where we left off last time.
Yeah, and we will definitely get to that, but how are you doing, and life and well-being, health, and everything good there in Texas?
Yeah, man. We're doing good. I got a little bit of a headache that's just kind of hanging, like just like by a thread. Like it's like I want to be annoying kind of headache, But I'm looking out the window and like there's these big billowing clouds up there, so there must be some kind of temperature change or pressure change getting ready to happen here. But I got myself a bottle of water here, so I should be good to go on that. But otherwise good. Been crazy busy with seed. Lots of good movement happening with seed lately.
Awesome.
Specifically in the video game side of things. I've had a bunch of people contacting me, and I don't know if you've ever used Discord before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I created separate Discord servers for each component of seed. One for the comic. I've been using the comic book server for a couple of years now, because a lot of people that I'm working that are working on this project with me are out of not even in the same country.
Right.
Spain, Argentina, South Africa, all over the place. But it's a great resource for collaboration and sharing files and that sort of thing. So I created a separate one to the TV side of it, another one for the video game side of it, and another one for the comic book side of it. And at this moment in time right now, they're all beginning to blend in it's starting to, the vision I've had all along is that they would all, blend into each other. One thing would influence another, etc. And so we're at that stage right now because I had stopped working on the comic book about halfway through it. The first half of issue 2 is Norman Kane is he's basically me. He's the me of the story. This dude's doing a conference and he's talking about his dad's encounter in the Solomon Islands. Now, my dad never had an encounter in Solomon Islands, but this is the background I have for this character. And the reason why he's talking about Nephilim and stuff, and he's on the public circuit talking about that, and he's talking about conspiracies and 9/11 and all kinds of stuff. So that's like the first half of issue 2. And then he ends by saying, one thing is certain, we're not alone, and then we go from there, that's halfway point of issue 2, to the encounter with the Kandahar, the giant of Kandahar, and troops in 2002, U.S. troops dealing with this thing. So I had just gotten to that point when, COVID hit and the lockdown, and then it was like, okay, eat and feed my family or pay comic book guys.
Right.
So kind of everything went on hold until things stabilized a little bit. But in the meantime, I started working on CGI characters of my soldiers. And then there's a specific region in Kandahar that I found on Google Earth that I really liked, and so I wanted to create a CGI version of that. And right about the time when I was kind of working through thoughts on all that, this guy contacted me and said, "Hey, I build scenery for video games. I'd like to work for your project." I'm like, "Okay, perfect."
Nice.
And then he told me about this plugin for there's this free 3D authoring software called Blender. And there's a plugin in Blender that allows you to basically open up Google Earth inside Blender, take a screenshot of whatever location you want, and then it brings that into Blender as a 3D model. Then you can take data that they have on Google Earth for topography elevation and plug data in. It's like 3 or 4 mouse clicks, and boom, you got like the mountain range with all the appropriate, real life, scale.
That's amazing.
Ridges, so like it perfectly recreated the mountain to scale, and then I had built this this area where the cave is. Now on that particular mountain there is not a cave, so I'm taking creative liberty and putting one there, and so I had that separately. And by the time this guy contacted me, and so he showed me that, I'm like, cool. I said, can you integrate what I've created into that? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he just did that. And then in the meantime, like 2 other guys contacted me that were had different skill sets in video game programming and stuff. And so we've been working all along on a NOAA VR virtual reality video game. And we're still working on that. But that's a really big project. That's just like a massive project. So with all these other new people that have come on board, and several of them willing to work for free at the moment, I'm like, well, let's go back and revisit some of my earlier game ideas, which were 2D game ideas for like your phone and your iPad, type of games. Much easier to create, but that can get the ball rolling. So they just signed non-disclosures this week, and we're about ready to dive into that again. So it's picking up basically where I left off on some of those ideas from like 2014, 15 back then. And then in the meanwhile, the TV side of things had some really good meetings this week. We've got what they call picture lock, which means I've signed off on all the general animation and camera angles and moves, and now we're moving into texturing, grooming the characters with hair, and filling in the backgrounds. And so now it's getting real exciting. And now that we have picture lock, we can go back to sound design and music. So the composer's getting ready to jump back in again, and the sound design guy's eager to do what he does and create all the sound effects and everything for it. So just a lot of crazy cool movement, a lot of busy, but all exciting stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing, brother. To have all of those bases covered and to be working on all of those different fronts and avenues to, manifest your dream. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And Jake Grant, who I believe you know,
yes,
he's coming down on Monday, this coming Monday, and we're gonna sit down and talk about getting him on board full time with me. To basically duplicate me, because other than CGI, 3D stuff, which I don't believe he knows how to do, all the other stuff I know how to do, he knows how to do. So
that's awesome.
Video editing and a lot of other things. So if I can effectively duplicate myself in him, and then create enough revenue, obviously, to pay him, then it'll be a real blessing for them, because he's out of work right now and looking for work. And
yeah, absolutely.
I think they're due this fall, and I've desperately been needing somebody like him for years now. So I'm really hopeful, excited for his visit coming in on Monday to see where all this goes.
Yeah. Well, God will make provision.
Yeah, amen.
I'm certain, and everything. And yeah, would be a great asset and resource. Got great respect for Jake, and really like him as a person, individual. So
definitely,
yeah. So that's awesome, man. Glad to hear that everything's progressing in all these different manners, and I should be within at least within a month done with the pre-Adamite books. It's now 500 plus pages, so I might have to separate it into 2 different books, which I did not want to do, but there's so much to it that that might be a possibility.
You
but
don't
after that
book.
What's that?
You don't want to publish an 800-page book?
No. I think that is intimidating for people, and especially for people that don't like to read, and so smaller in scale and easier to carry around, and and even if I have to do 2 volumes, but I want to complete this so I can get working on as far as the Book of Enoch movie and script, and start getting some progress on that. And so so I'm looking forward to being done with this and moving on to other things. And so,
were you able to recover from your computer issues that you were talking about last week?
Well, no, and I didn't want to send I could send the hard drive to a data recovery specialist, but it wasn't that much work. I just didn't want to recreate. So I just went ahead and started this week doing the things that I had added in the chapters, the additional material, which is why now it's over 500 when it was 455 pages, and I was going to be able to squeak by, get all that into one book, but now I'm going to have to consider doing something different. But still, to approach completion is really good, and I'm excited for that. Yeah,
450. That's about my limit.
Yeah, that should be the max. Yeah.
Anything much more than that, like I won't read a book like that's longer.
Right.
It'll become a reference book that I'll just kind of browse through and look for snippets or whatever. And when I was doing my books, the same thing. I was like, okay, if I wouldn't read it, I'm not going to.
Yeah, exactly.
So I actually tried to discipline I'm like, okay, 400's a cap, knowing I might go a little bit over, but so far I've been able to stay under with the, like Babylon Rising and Archon Invasion. But I say that, but I had to say, okay, Babylon Rising is going to be part 1 of 4, and then when I started working on Babylon Rising part 2. I realized that book was going to be way over 400 pages, so I changed the name to Archon Invasion Part 1. And so it's like Babylon Rising Part 2 became Archon Invasion Part 1 of 2. And I mean, it's just like, I know for certain that I will never, ever be bored, and I will always have something to do. So,
right. Yeah. I don't understand people that are bored and don't have anything to do. That just doesn't in any way make any sense to me.
No,
right?
Definitely not.
Yeah. Well, did you want to get into it?
Sure. So maybe we just. I don't want to reread
commentary.
Yeah, I don't want to reread chapter 5 again, just so for the sake of time. But we were talking about some of the discrepancies in Joshua 5 versus what was in Jubilees, and actually Jubilees was the one that veered the most from the narrative. Joshua stays really close, not perfect, but very close to the Genesis narrative, where Jubilees kind of went ting off in a different direction. And I've always I like Jubilees. There's a lot of good stuff in Jubilees, but best I can tell, Jubilees only traces back to probably at the most maybe 200 BC. I can't find much more evidence. Maybe you have found something more, but I haven't been able to find a whole lot more that would date it. Maybe on the outside 400 BC, but somewhere between 400 and 200 BC. Whereas, and I saw the comments, some of the people that are maybe even with us here in the chat room now, but some of the people that commented on last week's show was like, of course, Joshua's, not right because it's fraudulent. It's a fraudulent book. It's not right. And he's going off on, how. And I'll just reiterate that, look, Dr. Ken Johnson and Joseph B. Lumpkin and others have done a tremendous amount of research tracing that, most people who would say that Joshua's not the Joshua that we hear about in the Bible. The Bible mentions the book of Joshua twice by name and then by inference at least once or twice in other places, like where Paul is talking about Jannes and Jambres, the two individuals that opposed Moses, during the Exodus showdown. Exodus, the Torah doesn't give you the names of those guys. So it's like, well, did Paul know? How did he know that? He got that from Joshua.
Yes.
Now, the question is whether the Joshua we now hold in our hand in English is, in fact, translated from the same Joshua that Paul was aware of. And both Lumpkin and Johnson trace it back to at least the 70 AD. They trace it back through the Middle Ages, which the people who think it's a fraudulent text will say it's a
medieval.
Medieval, yeah. I had medieval, forgery or something. And no, that's when translation started to happen of it in the Middle Ages. But that the text itself traces back at least as far back as to 70 AD and the destruction of the temple, where supposedly there's a scribe that was preserving some text and he was hiding inside a wall between walls, I guess, when the temple was being destroyed. And the Romans, when they're tearing down the temple walls, found this guy and basically took him away as a slave, and he ended up in Sevilla, Spain. And that's where that text, stayed until the Middle Ages. Started to be translated into other languages and finally English. And so we got it back to at least 70 AD. But then if you read the story of the development of the Septuagint, so the story goes, after Alexander the Great died and the 4 generals took over, Ptolemy was in charge of the people that known as the Israelites, and he wanted to know about their religious texts, and they didn't want to give this pagan their Torah. So they gave him Joshua.
Right.
After he read Joshua, he's like, and he found out they were holding out on him. He's like, okay, here's the deal. And he made 70 different scholars separate into different rooms. And this is what's extraordinary about the Septuagint, why they call it the Septuagint, is because, so the story goes, 70 different scholars were put in separate rooms, and the command was, transcribe for me, translate for me your prophet Moshe. And each one, the Holy Spirit put in their heart to translate identically from Hebrew to Greek, identically, without variant. 70 different scholars doing this did a perfect translation of the Septuagint.
Pretty amazing.
I mean, all the more so proof when we start talking about biblical cosmology and words it chose, like gyru for circle, which is not sphera, is the Greek word used for ball or sphere or globe, which, if they're taking their Hebrew word hug and they meant to convey globe in a time when that was actually beginning to be known in that world, in the Greek world, because you had Pythagoras and Eratosthenes, right, saying, hey, there's a globe, and Aristotle and people like that. So they were living in a time when that worldview was beginning to manifest. Well, if the Hebrews understood the world to be that way, they had plenty of Greek words from which to choose to convey that, but they didn't. They chose gyro and gyru, which is circle, for hug, appropriately taking a Greek translation from the Hebrew word, which does not convey sphericity. And then even more so when it comes to for the firmament, going from rakia, which some people want to say is ambiguous. I don't think it is.
I don't either.
But stereoma is not.
Right.
Stereoma is about as hardcore, emphatic, solid, firm structure, foundation kind of thing. There's no way you can get air, gas, and vacuum of space out of that thing.
Right.
Out of that word, stereoma. So, I am extremely thankful for the Greek translation that we call the Septuagint, because it was done by Hebrew scholars who understood their Hebrew language, their Hebrew text, the Hebrew context, and historical context, and they chose the appropriate words. But we wouldn't have even had the Septuagint if it wasn't for the Book of Joshua. So, I know this is review. We've covered this in other shows before, but I just wanted to make that comment again because
very important.
I was reading some of the comments from last week's show. Mm-hmm. But so Joshua, I tend to give it more credibility. And again, none of us, neither you nor I, are saying that we put it on par with Scripture. Now, Enoch, on the other hand, there's good reason to call it Scripture. There were plenty of so-called church fathers that viewed it and called it Scripture. Ethiopian Coptic Church still has it in their Bible today as Scripture. So Enoch, I have no problem considering it on the same level as what we call the canonized Scripture. Joshua is always viewed, as far as I can tell, as just a historical document like Josephus that corresponds with and elaborates on and confirms the canonized text. Jubilees, though, is a wild card, and I really don't know what to make of it, other than it's got some cool, interesting stuff in it, but it definitely seems to veer off where Joshua seems to stay a lot closer to the biblical narrative of Genesis, where Jubilees has quite a bit of variance. So what's your take on those things? Like
I find them very interesting, and then again, when they confirm what I know to be the inspiration of the canon with regard to, the work of Ivan Panin and others, even my friend Bill McGregor, who did the tuning fork and confirms that the 66 books of chapters of Isaiah fit in line with and are, divinely inspired and connected to the 66 books of the King James Version of the Bible. Whenever there's agreement and greater elaboration, I accept it as confirming witness. But when something contradicts, I keep that as interesting thought and something to look at and consider. But of course, I'm going to hold and stand on the truth of, the foundational, the canonical materials, because again, the work of others and showing that without a doubt they're divinely inspired, and of course I know them to be absolutely prophetic as well. So
but when we see cases where Enoch and Joshua are falling really close with Genesis, but it kind of goes bing. Have you traced it back any earlier than say 200 to 400 BC, or is that what your research confirms?
No, and with regard to doing a lot of that, I've not spent a whole lot of time doing that as far as looking into the background and tracing down when texts were written. I've mainly just spent a lot of time reading and studying them. Even though I am interested in those things, I think a lot of that is somewhat fabricated, and that the professionals and those that are considered experts, that they seem to date things to latter times, and I tend to not really believe a lot of what they say, and so their opinions aren't, very, very important. Because I know that a lot of the things, even with what they say with some of these other books, that they may be the latest translations of testimonies and books that, in my opinion, date back to even pre-flood times, and that were carried over. And that, then they also attribute a lot of these pseudepigraphal books or the apocryphal books as being written by people of latter times, when, in my opinion, they are, like, for instance, the primary Adamic literature, the testaments of the life of Adam and Eve. Well, I don't think that people that lived hundreds of years after wrote those testimonies. I believe that they came down, they were written and scribed by, if not Adam, then his children who knew and understood his life. And in the same way that you have the infancy gospels that were written by Didymus Thomas and James, the half brothers, the step brothers of Yahushua, and that grew up with Mary as their mother and Yahushua as their brother. And so who better to write the accounts of their lives and, the early childhood? And so I think, in my opinion, a lot of these testaments that were written on the deathbeds and the blessings and the prophecies associated to the descendants and the children, and that the early patriarchs, certainly in relationship with the Most High, knew and were given knowledge. And I also believe that Adam was given books previous to his expulsion from paradise, and that these things were passed on. It speaks about the 5 books of creation, the book of signs, the book of astrology, the book of the wars of the Lord, the book of the law, and also the book of the generations of man. And we can see that in the book of Enoch, there seems to be sections that are linked to what could have been the passing on of these books. And it says that they were given to Enoch and then given to Noah and Shem and Abraham and passed on. Just as the garments of power and the rod of wonder were also bequeathed to these different generations. And so I think that, a lot of what the experts say and the people that they attribute as having written those books, I don't necessarily believe them. All right, we'll be right back, everyone.
The seeker of lost paradise may seem a fool to those who have never sought the other worlds. Christ told us in Revelation to remember from whence thou art fallen and do the first works. What many people don't realize about the fall of humanity is that Adam and Eve were initially bright-natured and that they were placed into the garden of God to dress and tend it, and that being deceived and tempted and eating from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that in that moment that you touch thereof you shall die, that they come under the authority of death in those moments, and since their fall have been banished from the place of the immortals. This concept becomes very clear in the work of the forgotten Edenic books of Adam and Eve. And as we study and read into this material, this knowledge will come to light, and it will help you to understand that being restored to our bright nature, our first estate through Christ, that the reason he had to take on embodiment and enter into mortal flesh form was in order to not only redeem the ancestors of Adam, the children of light, but also to rectify us and to restore us to our first estate in this manner, defeating death and bringing forth salvation with the promise of the cross.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
Which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Eventually reach what they seek and then solve all the problems of man, but they really don't know that they fall in the works of our hands are but just filthy rags. So we travel the lands to dig up our past time, our lapses, and with it are much of the facts of my imagine that God's came in alien grass.
God then gave him the book of the angel Raziel, which he studied day and night. Upon the death of Adam, the holy book disappeared, but later the cave in which it was hidden was revealed to Enoch in a dream. It was from this book that Enoch drew his knowledge of nature, of the earth and of the heavens, and he became so wise through it that his wisdom exceeded the wisdom of Adam. Once he had committed it to memory, Enoch hid the book again. It's from the Legends of the Jews. But anyways, let me turn it back over to you.
I love little snippets like that, because
Yeah.
these are the kind of stuff when we finally both lock ourselves down to doing the Enoch screenplay.
Right.
I mean, we can really hash out a lot of these cool little snippet things. And see, that was for people who are listening right now. I call seed for a lot of reasons, but one of the many reasons is that I'm planting seeds. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, in the industry, they use a different term. They call them Easter eggs, which I don't like for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But in the industry, that's when they hide things intentionally in the production, that the filmmakers know it's there, and they leave it up to the audience to try to discover them. And especially sci-fi geeks, they're all over that. They'll be looking for the Easter eggs in Star Trek or Star Wars or Marvel comics or whatever type of movie. They'll be looking for them, and they create fan-based wiki pages and websites dedicated to fan theories of what's going to happen to the characters, or where the plot's headed or whatever. And that's exactly what I want to happen with Seed, is when we're planting these seeds in there intentionally, that people will be like, well, where's that? And they're going to go dig for it,
Right.
And so some of the things I was talking about with crossovers between the comic book, video game, and TV series is like this cave that I'm developing right now for the encounter with the Kandahar giant. This is in the land of Afghanistan. But I mean, there are lots of different things with the Cave of Treasures and all kinds of different things where they don't give us any location. All we know is they were banished to the east of Eden.
Right.
And they made various treks to try to get back into Eden. And I've had some really cool ideas and stories for that. But, I'm thinking, okay, so I have this cave that I'm creating that this giant's currently living in 2002 in my story. But I'm like, what if that cave actually goes all the way back to the pre-flood world? And if it does, what was the purpose of it back then? It's the kind of things that we're thinking about. And, that when I get other creative minds together, where we can sit down and brainstorm these things, that's where it's a lot of fun for me.
Right.
I'm a geek, like kid in a candy store, loving that kind of stuff,
Yeah, it's like the whole story of the Cave of Treasures, and how in the Revelation of the Magi it talks about, and even the first book of Adam and Eve, that Christ tells Adam that when he is going to be born of his descendant, in order to save him and to redeem him and to return him to his first estate, that he would lead the Magi, which were the children of Seth, to the Cave of Treasures, where they would find the testimonies and the testaments of their ancient forefathers, and then they would bring the myrrh, frankincense, and the gold, which Adam was given from paradise, to him as gifts, and and also as a sign of his kingship and a fulfillment of those prophecies. And according to the Revelation of the Magi, that is exactly what happened. And so, I mean, these kind of things, little known, but incredibly profound when you consider them in the prophetic nature of the story, and all of that. Even how Yahushua fulfilled the Levitical feast days and the second return, and how that, I believe, will be connected to the remaining fall feasts and all of that.
Yeah. The Cave of Treasures, there's a whole lot of stuff in the books of Adam and Eve going into great detail about the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that's in the cave with them, and what the purpose of it was and all that. And I find all that fascinating. And we've touched on this in previous broadcasts, but the thing that throws me off with that is that in those texts, it clearly says that the Messiah will come in 5,500 years.
Yeah, exactly right.
Now, with our King James and Joshua and even, various rabbinic texts, they follow a different timeline. You're missing 1,000 years. So I still don't know what to make of that, dude. That's still, it's one of those really problematic, thorn in the mind's eye kind of thing. I'm so happy with the current timeline because it all plays out very nice and neat.
Right.
And everything's like perfect. But then you got to try to squeeze another 1,000 years before Christ somewhere in there. I'm like, well, let's put it pre-Adam. How's that?
Right.
I don't know. It doesn't work because it's at 5,500 years from Adam. So I can't even do that. So I don't know. But, you were talking about dating, how the, various so-called experts will date something. I'm with you, man. That stuff frustrates me. Where people say, well, Enoch only dates back to 400 years BC. And I'm like, correction. The earliest known copies of Enoch.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Date back. I mean, the fact that they had like 6 copies of the Book of Enoch, in various stages of, I don't want to say completion. I think a lot of it had deteriorated, but, fragments of 6 different copies in Cave 4 alone of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Mm-hmm. So, there are multiple caves. So, this was a well-read book. But where I extend the age of these books is by internal witness. Is okay. I mean, if we accept the Torah, Genesis is the first book in our Bible, but Job predates Genesis, and there are inferences in both Job and Genesis, the Torah in general, not just Genesis, that allude to things that only have precedence because there's no other books before that, in the canonized text, that find precedence only in the Book of Enoch. I mean, the Day of Atonement,
right?
Well, Genesis 6, first of all, he's talking about sons of God. So there's an understanding of that the sons of God were angels that came down with women and produced this hybrid offspring called Nephilim. And he uses the Hebrew word Nephilim with no further elaboration, which says to me that A, Moses knows who the Nephilim are, and B, so does his audience, because he explain it.
Right.
You and I have to go digging for it. We have to go looking for it. But they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we all know that story. Yeah,
Yeah, it's common knowledge.
And then when you get to the feasts, when Leviticus 23 and various other places talking about the feast, and what is it? I think it's Leviticus 16, maybe, talking about the Day of Atonement and casting lots for Azazel.
Right.
There's no precedence for that anywhere. Like, what? And specifically a proper name, another being.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you've got to extend the dating of Enoch because of internal witnesses like that. And same thing with Joshua. I mean, Joshua is mentioned in the book of Joshua, which is the next book after the Deuteronomy.
Right.
And presumably it had to have been written and known about, at least contemporary with the events of the Torah, for it to be referenced in Joshua, where, because when we read Joshua talk about him commanding the sun to stand still, it says, it makes a statement. Yeah, he made the sun and moon stand still, and he goes, "Is it not written in Joshua?"
Yes, exactly right.
And they're using Joshua as validation. Like, in other words, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, well, yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, we know it's in Joshua." So, and the attitude is the way that's written is. That's if to say, well, then it must be true.
Yes, exactly. Right.
So these are the internal witnesses that I go to that say there has to have been, an understanding of these books, whether they're completely fleshed out in the form that we have them today or not. I don't know, but because many of these things were probably passed down orally before finally being written down. But there was certainly an understanding of these things, and they were put together in some kind of, at least Joshua was, for it to be, is it not written in Joshua? Yep. In Joshua. That's right after Deuteronomy.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So the professional opinion and the experts that date these things to, medieval ages and all that, I take all that with a grain of salt.
Somebody was confused by what I said in the chat room about Job. They said, wait, I thought Job happened in early Genesis, not pre-Genesis. What I mean by that is that the book of Job, the writing of that book predates the writing of the book of Genesis, not the events of Genesis.
Right.
I'm not saying the events of Job happened before the events of Genesis. I'm saying that the publishing of the book was written before the publishing of the book of Genesis. I hope that clears it up a little bit more so people aren't confused on that. So let me put up on the screen for those watching on YouTube. I know there are people watching us live, but they'll be seeing it in the archive also. But for the sake of people listening on the radio, in Joshua chapter 5, it says in verse 16, and Noah was 498 years old when he took Naamah for a wife. And we had already shown that Naamah was the daughter of Enoch. That's actually in verse 15. I was a little tripped up on that last week, thinking there was Eliakim, but that's because I was confusing. The three wives of Noah's three sons were chosen from Eliakim, brother of Methuselah. But Noah's wife was the daughter of Enoch. And so he was 498 years old when he took Naamah for a wife. And Naamah conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Japheth, saying, God has enlarged me in the earth. And she conceived again and bare a son, and he called his name Shem, saying, God has made me a remnant to raise up seed in the midst of the earth. And then we go right to 18. And Noah was 502 years old when Naamah bare Shem, and the boys grew up and went in the ways of the Lord, and all that Methuselah and Noah their father taught them. And then Lamech dies, and then we go on to other stuff, and there's no mention of the birth of Ham.
Ham, exactly.
Joshua, which I always thought was rather peculiar. And this was, I was just about to say that when we ran out of time last week. So for those of you wondering what I was about to say, like Sheila was listening, she's like, you never finished your thought. I'm like, we ran out of time. I couldn't finish my thought because I was like, and another thing, and I'm like, we're out of time. Well, that was the other thing that was on my mind, was that Joshua leaves out the birth of Ham. Now we see, obviously, as we continue reading, that Ham's in the picture, but we don't have any direct reference to his birth happening here in Joshua.
Right.
So, and you shared briefly, maybe we can pick this where we can pick up where we left off, I guess. Your theory on the origin of Ham, and then I'll sort of give my commentary on that.
Yeah. Well, let me see if I can pull it up. But there is a manuscript that is called the Writings of Abraham that mentions that God wanted to save the bloodline of Cain through the flood of Noah's day and to preserve them, and that he had made provision for doing so. And so in this particular book, it speaks about how Ham is, from a second wife. And so I'll just read this particular passage, if I can pull it up here, and just to give people an idea of what I am alluding to, and then so that people know, there is something out there that is speaking about this. Ham.
So
here it is.
So that to say, as by way of disclaimer, this isn't Zen Garcia's theory.
Yeah, I'm not making this up.
He's gonna, as usual, he's gonna pull out an ancient text for the reason for his belief. So don't shoot the messenger here.
Yeah, exactly. Just reading what it says, and so this particular text called the Writings of Abraham, And when Noah was 450 years old, he begat a son, and he called his name Japheth. 42 years later, he begat another son of her who was the mother of Japheth, and he called his name Shem. 8 years later, Noah begat a son of his wife Naamah, who was of the seed of Cain, and he called his name Ham. For he said, through him will the curse be preserved in the land. And so, it goes on in greater detail and speaks about how this was all done and how the seed of Cain was preserved. But I won't go all into that because it's quite long.
Okay, so it specifically says, because we're in agreement that his wife was Naamah.
Right.
But
this is a second Naamah. I believe that this Naamah is the sister of Tubal-Cain, even though I do believe that, according to Jasher, that he married a Naamah that was a daughter of Enoch, and that Shem and Japheth were born from her. And then this particular book mentions a different Naamah who is of the seed of Cain, which we know that in the genealogical listings in chapter 4, that she was the daughter of Lamech and the twin sister of Tubal-Cain, specifically of the seed of Cain. So I consider that it might be possible that Noah married two Naamahs, one from the daughter of Enoch, the line of Adam, and then the other, the sister of Tubal-Cain, and that she was the mother of Ham, and which when Ham saw the nakedness of Noah's wife, that he then, had sexual relations with his mother, who was in this case Naamah, who was already of the seed of the serpent, and so that would make Canaan predominantly serpent seed, which is how the seed of the serpent was preserved through the flood.
That text? What's that text that you're reading from?
The writings of Abraham. And so I'll just read one more passage. Now Noah had taken a wife of the seed of Cain, and she was a righteous woman. Nevertheless, the curse remained with her seed according to the word of God. And Noah took her on this wise. For the word of the Lord came unto Noah, saying, take unto thyself Naamah, the daughter of Lamech, who dwelleth here in the city of thy fathers, for she hath been faithful to my gospel. Wherefore I shall preserve through her the seed of Cain through the flood. This Lamech, who was the father of Naamah, was of the seed of Cain, being the son of Methuselah, the son of Mehujael, the son of Ired, the son of Enoch, the son of Cain.
Very interesting. I got a resource that I frequently pull out when I want to look at something like this, called the Wall Chart of World History from earliest times to present. Also sometimes known as the Adams Wall Chart of World History. And it has Naamah, the offspring of Lamech from Cain, being born about looks like about 480 AM or 480 years after creation. And so how far, and this was the reason why I rejected that, is because that makes her older than Methuselah at the time that Noah. Well, let me see. Unless he married her first, that would contradict Scripture, because Scripture says that Japheth was the eldest.
Right.
Because Noah, he shows up at about 1050 AM, 1050 AM. So she would be way old. If that's, but what's interesting to me is, especially in that culture, typically women aren't mentioned in any genealogy unless there's a reason to do so. They'll just say, and he had daughters. If that particular daughter served some function in the overall narrative, then you'd get a name, a mention. You got Leah and Rachel, and different. There are certainly women mentioned throughout the Bible, but they are mentions because there's a specific function in the overall historical narrative that they're fulfilling. And so this is the only reason that I would give it any measure of credibility. Sure, it's written in these texts. Okay, great. But just like we pointed out earlier, Jubilees has stuff that's jacked up too, that I would disregard. So the age is what trips me up there. But it is interesting that they even bothered, because if for everybody else, it said they would say, and they had sons and daughters. In fact, there's no daughter mentioned anywhere, as far as I can see here, from any lineage until way, way later. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is the first female mentioned,
right.
Right. So that is interesting. I really don't know what to make of it, honestly. And, if, and again, Zen didn't make that up. He's reading from an ancient text that did. That would cause some major problems genetically as far as the gene pool goes. My thesis is that we know that the three wives of the three sons, and let me see if I can pull that up. I was looking at Genesis 5:32. Genesis 5:32 says Noah was 500 years old and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So there's no discrepancy there, because Noah is still the father.
Right.
Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so, but let me think this through here. So that still would work out. Okay, so my thesis is that the Nephilim genetics carried forward in the women, and that's actually a good thing. If God, for whatever reason, in His sovereignty, decides Nephilim are going to be after the flood, which clearly He did make that decision. So whether you're of the camp that said, well, the Nephilim returned after the flood because God allowed angels to pick up where they left off, which I think is patently absurd. That makes actually, God complicit in the problem by saying, oh yeah, I know, I allowed it last time, and now there's only 8 human beings on the earth. There's only 4 women. Hey, angels, pick up where you left off. That's just ridiculous. There's no common sense to that. It's completely absurd, especially considering the extremely severe judgment of the Watchers.
Of the flood, yeah.
But even before the flood.
Right.
700 years before the flood, the judgment of the Watchers for doing with it. It's such that Michael, he's like, dude, no one's doing that again. Michael,
right.
The archangel himself is like, he was trembling. So that's off the table as far as I'm concerned. No angels coming back and mating.
Well, I was just going to say that the Book of Baruch also says that the judgment of the flood killed 409,000 giants. Yeah, and so, it was specific to targeting them for their behavior and not, because of humanity becoming evil, even though they did. But
humanity, that was collateral damage.
Yes.
But what we get from Joshua 4:18 and Jubilee 7:24 is that humans were willingly complicit. Like they would get this knowledge from the Watchers and let's create weapons of war and start blending ourselves with animals, and they were 100% on board with it. So that's why the humans were judged right alongside.
Right. They had gone the way of Cain. Yeah.
And frankly, why the animals also had to be destroyed.
Right.
God could have just sent the plague that just wiped out people, if he really wanted to.
Right.
But it says earth and all flesh had become corrupted. So the earth itself had become corrupted, and all flesh, all men and all animals became corrupted. So that, according to the text that we've been going over in this study, was specifically as the result of genetic manipulation, GMO. That's what we're doing today, as it was in the days of Noah.
Right.
That was taking place. But my thesis talks about Genesis 6:12. That's the verse that said the earth and all flesh should become corrupted. And I always ask the question, well, how did that happen? And then you look at Joshua 4:18 and Jubilee 7:24, which elaborate and tell you that happened as a result of the corruption of all flesh, manipulation, genetic, splicing and all that kind of stuff. And so then you get to verse 18 of Genesis 6, and you have the first mention of the 3 wives. And in Joshua 5, which we read last week, it said that he picked the 3 wives for the 3 sons of Noah, which is interesting also. Let me pull that up. Because we have no mention of the birth of Ham in Joshua, but we have mention of the 3 sons. So in verse 35, and Noah took the 3 daughters of Eliakim, son of Methuselah. Son of Methuselah. Okay. So that would be brother of Lamech, I guess. Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. Yeah. So brother of Lamech, right? Eliakim, son of Methuselah, for wives for his sons. So it's 3 daughters for wives for his sons. So Ham's implied there in verse 35 of Joshua 5. And I always ask the audience, because the wives don't show up in Genesis 6 until verse 18. I say, which comes first, 12 or 18? Well, 12 comes first. 12 is the corruption of all flesh. So, and when you get to Genesis 9.
Wow. Hold on, brother.
Oh, here we are.
Yeah. All right, we'll be right back for a second hour, everybody.
The seeker of lost paradise may seem a fool to those who have never sought the other worlds. Christ told us in Revelation to remember from whence thou art fallen and do the first works. What many people don't realize about the fall of humanity is that Adam and Eve were initially bright-natured and that they were placed into the garden of God to dress and tend it, and that being deceived and tempted and eating from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that in that moment that you touch thereof you shall die, that they come under the authority of death in those moments, and since their fall have been banished from the place of the immortals. This concept becomes very clear in the work of the forgotten Edenic books of Adam and Eve. And as we study and read into this material, this knowledge will come to light, and it will help you to understand that being restored to our bright nature, our first estate through Christ, that the reason he had to take on embodiment and enter into mortal flesh form was in order to not only redeem the ancestors of Adam, the children of light, but also to rectify us and to restore us to our first estate in this manner, defeating death and bringing forth salvation with the promise of the cross.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Sacred Word Revealed
comes to Atlanta, Georgia
on September 11th to the 13th, 2020.
Purpose to reveal end-time mysteries.
To prepare the final generation,
we must don the full armor of God.
Featuring Zen Garcia,
Dr. Joy Pugh,
Rob Skiba,
Gary Wayne,
Yana Ben Noon,
Stephen Benoon,
Dr. Stephen Pigeon,
Zen Garcia,
Laurel Austin,
Nathan Reynolds, Buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
Inquired of the Lord, and returned this word unto his son Lamech. Verily, thus saith the Lord, mine handmaiden Naamah have I given unto my son Noah, that the seed of Cain might be preserved through the great flood, which I will send upon the earth. Wherefore let not my son Noah fear to take her to wife, for in so doing he shall be blessed, for through him will come all nations. In this manuscript, it shows that Noah was extremely hesitant to marry into the seed of Cain, because, in all the earlier and previous generations, they were told not to mix with the children of Cain or to take wives of them. And this prohibition was passed on even through, we see that Judah, that even he and Esau taking Canaanite wives, that this was a serious no-no.
It is interesting, though, because even though Cain did what he did, God showed mercy to him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, I've said it before. Look, I can't repent of being born with the ancestry that I have.
Right.
I have a heritage. I came from a line of, I'm a melting pot. I am America. I've got lots of stuff in me.
Right.
I can't repent of any of that. A child is born. What choice do you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is interesting. And that even it says the offspring of Abraham would be blessed, and we see Ishmael. Well, Ishmael's blessed. Isaac's the chosen one,
right.
But Ishmael's blessed. Isaac's and his offspring are blessed, and then he goes and marries Keturah, who was a Canaanite, and then you have Canaanites and stuff after that, and I'm like, what? So maybe it's just Yahuwah and his divine mercy making a way of salvation, for some of these other people through the righteous. And so I was trying to think through your argument. It's not your argument. The text that you're reading. Again, an issue with the age discrepancy. I mean, she's just way old. Because if you actually look at it on a timeline, I mean, it's like over 1,000 years. But putting that aside for now, in Genesis 9:18 and 19, which to me is the slam dunk, smoking gun, destroy second incursion, scripture. Just because Moses, the same guy who wrote Genesis 6:4, also wrote Genesis 9:18 and 19, which says, and this, let me put it up on the screen so people don't think I'm trying to pull a fast one here. Genesis 9:18 and 19. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. Rather interesting.
Right.
L.A. Marzulli and everybody else will recognize that the Canaanites were the ones that the Israelites were told to utterly destroy over and over again. Why? Because they were Nephilim. So you got entire ministries who go out there telling you, well, yeah, the Canaanites, the reason why God was, he's not schizophrenic, prejudiced into random acts of genocide. He had a specific reason why he isolated certain people groups for quote unquote utter destruction, kill everything, wipe out the animals, even, wipe out everything, because they were Nephilim. So they all recognize that Canaan was Nephilim, but they want to just completely pretend this verse doesn't exist. And I mean, it's like it's calling it out, like, hello, and Ham is the father of Canaan. And then if you still didn't get it, the next verse. And these are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. Other translations say populated. The whole earth was populated by these three guys. No mention of another incursion of angels. So in the text that you were reading, it says that the line of Cain, which you recognize as serpent seed from Genesis 3, that Noah married Naamah of that line and produced
his second wife, yes.
And produced Ham. And I would maintain, though, and I'll explain why in a minute, because it fits into my thesis anyway, that Ham could still be 100% normal, even though he might carry some genetic codes. It's more of a problem, though, and the reason I say that is because Noah is pure and righteous in his generations. It's the purity of Noah that, and I'll show people who are watching on YouTube in a minute, a Punnett square, where you can figure out the odds of what type of offspring you're going to have using a Punnett square, that Ham could still be 100% normal. It says, and Noah, of course, we read in Joshua, married Naamah, daughter of Enoch, the good Enoch, not the bad Enoch or any of the line of Cain, and produced Ham, in which case Ham would be 100% normal. The 3 wives, however, come from Eliakim, who we will note did not make it on the ark, nor did any, his wife or any other offspring that he may have had. If the 3 wives had, if those women had brothers or sisters, they didn't make it on either. Nobody else made it on. The 3 wives made it on because, you got to have wives if you're going to populate the earth again, right?
Right.
So let me see if I can do a screen share here. Run through a few things. Okay. So in one of my presentations, I asked, were there female Nephilim too? Yeah, I certainly believe there were. I actually got some pictures of some very tall women in real life, that dwarf men, I'm not saying that these women are Nephilim. I'm just saying, if we define Nephilim as giants, there are certainly gigantic women out there that could have genetic codes or whatever. They're just growing really tall. But I have a section called Suspicious Women in the Rise of the X-Men, and continuing with the question, were there female Nephilim too? Well, judging from the mythologies of various ancient cultures, pick a culture, they had just as many female quote-unquote goddesses as there were male gods, right? You can go through, the Greek myths. I got a bunch of names. I won't go through them all there. Get into the biblical text. We have Diana of the Ephesians, Ashtaroth of the Zidonians, the Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah chapter 7, and, Ishtar, Isis, all that stuff. So we have plenty of references to female women of renown that would correspond with the men of renown that we would say were Nephilim, according to Genesis chapter 6. We see throughout Deuteronomy and other places where they're told to wipe out these various cultures of the Canaanites, where they're told repeatedly to utterly destroy them, the men, women, and children. Over and over and over again, we see that. Right. Then you have depictions of people like Nefertiti, Akhenaten, and these characters with the cone heads,
elongated skulls, yeah,
elongated heads, yeah. And
right.
I've got a picture on the screen for those listening on the radio, a bust of Nefertiti with a large hat sticking up, and I say, that's not just a cool hat she's wearing. She's covering up one heck of a dome of a head, because there are other depictions of her, showing this big old cone head, just like Akhenaten had. So, and their children too. They got little cone head babies, sitting on their laps, in the various depictions that you'll see out there. And so, yeah, I mean, I am of the opinion that the variety of Nephilim that came through on the ark through the women were likely human sized, not necessarily giant, because I don't believe they always had to be giants. Angel human hybrids, yes. Animal human hybrids, no. I'm of the opinion that the variety of Nephilim that we're dealing with immediately before the flood and what came as a result after the flood was primarily the result of animal human hybridization. Although it's interesting if we take what you have said, what you have read, and throw in the line of Cain as well, that just makes it all the more interesting. So as I'm thinking about all those things, a friend of mine, Jeff Randall, comes to town and he has a replica of a conehead skull from Peru that was taken. It was cast right from one of the actual skulls, a real famous one. And so he comes through town and we go out. He's like, I hadn't seen him in several years. And he's like, man, we got to catch up. I'm like, yeah, cool. He's like, I'm coming. He was in New York and he came back to Dallas after being gone for several years. And it's like, yeah, can we meet? And I was like, sure. So we went to Cracker Barrel and he pulls out of this bag this conehead skull. He's
Wow.
like, here you go, dude. Maybe this will help you with your research. I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? Yeah. Of course, we had a lot of very interesting conversations with people in the restaurant, looking over at us with this conehead skull. But
I'm sure.
so he gives that to me. And, of course, I was well aware of, other researchers, Brian Forrester, and of course, L.A. Marzulli has done a lot of research on that as well. People who are not familiar with it, just look up the conehead skulls of Peru and you're going to find, some radically elongated skulls. Some people want to say that's just cranial headboarding where they wrap the baby's heads. And I mean, that takes place. They do that, but that begs the question, why? Like, what possesses parents to start strapping boards to their kids' head to stretch it out? Like, they were trying, in my opinion, and this is a shared opinion with many scholars who research this, is that they were trying to emulate something that existed that they without cranial headboarding.
Right.
Trying to emulate that. And there's all kinds of skulls that have been found in Mexico and different places. And they even found, to prove that it's not just cranial headboarding, they found a fetus inside the mummified remains of a pregnant woman. 7 months of a 7
wow.
I mean, the drawing that they did of it looks like Alien, like from the movie. They somehow, I guess, extracted the 7-month-old fetus from the mummified remain of a pregnant woman, and saw that it, and it's also, it has different cranial suture patterns and, missing, plates compared to the normal human skull and stuff like that. So this was a baby being formed in the womb with a cone head. And so then I got various pictures of that. When artists have taken that skull, the same one that I have a replica of, and they show it compared, superimposed over a normal human skull, it has something like 25% larger brain capacity, which in and of itself tells you this isn't cranial headboarding, because cranial headboarding is going to change the shape of the skull, but it's not going to increase the brain, And there are conehead skulls that have as much as 40% more brain space inside there. And so this artist took that skull and, using clay, started to build the muscular aspects of the skull and put flesh on it, and came up with a rendering, a sculpture of what that person may have looked like. And so this kind of strange looking woman with a big nose and big cone head. And I say, okay, maybe that's not attractive to you. And I say, well, what about this? And then I post pictures of, beautiful women who have beehive hairdo. That's a common hairdo that women will do, where they, do their hair up. And frankly, it looks like they got a cone head, I mean, there's nothing that says they had to be, butt ugly. They could have been quite attractive. And so it is my contention that even if the wives were 50-50 hybrid, 50% corrupted and 50% good, you still have the opportunity to create 100% normal offspring. And I got a picture of the X-Men there, but actually, I was talking about Halle Berry actually has, with regard to the X-Men, she has 6 toes. I'm going, Anyway.
For real?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
6 toes. But so I have on the screen, I'll try to describe this for people listening on the radio, but I created what I call a nephelosome instead of a chromosome. So a woman has 2 X chromosomes.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's crazy.
2 X chromosomes, and a man has an X and a Y chromosome, right? And so I say, well, what if a woman is a 50-50 hybrid? She has 1 nephelosome. I just made that up, but one corrupted X chromosome and 1 good X chromosome. Well, you have 4 possibilities of offspring. If she contributes her nephelosome X, and he contributes, the husband contributes his good X chromosome, then you have a 50-50 female hybrid Nephilim offspring. If she contributes her nephilosome X chromosome, and he contributes his good Y chromosome, then you have a 50-50 male hybrid offspring. If she contributes her good X chromosome and he contributes his good X chromosome, then you have a 100% normal female. If she contributes her good X chromosome and he contributes his good Y chromosome, you have a 100% normal male offspring. So even if Noah had a wife and Ham could still have been 100% normal. He could have still been normal. But with the wives, we see that Ham is doing something wrong. And I say, well, what would determine the odds then? If it's a 50-50 chance, if you have 50-50 chance of producing either another hybrid or a normal child, what determines the odds? Well, I think Scripture tells you that. It says the sins of the fathers are passed down to the third and fourth generation, right? And obedience, you get blessed 1,000 generations. So all you have to do is look at the offspring of Noah and see who's obedient and who's not. And we see a prohibition in the Torah from uncovering the father's nakedness is having sex with your mother. That Ham clearly did that. And
Canaan was a result.
Well, many people think that. I'm not of the opinion that Canaan was. I think Put was the result. But and my reason for that is that Canaan was there to be cursed, because Noah said, "Cursed be Canaan." Ham's not cursed. That's the other thing I want to make sure the audience knows, that neither Zen nor I are saying Ham is cursed. Scripture says Canaan was cursed. Noah cursed Canaan, and my contention is, well, he had to be there for him to be cursed. And my theory on this is, like, why did he even bother to mess around with his mother, like Ham? What was the reason for it? And my theory is that maybe he was thinking along the same lines as the daughters of Lot, who, with Sodom and Gomorrah, when Lot's wife turned around and she became a pillar of salt, and they saw, for their all intents and purposes, they saw the world being destroyed. They didn't know that it wasn't just that place alone. Like, I mean, that destruction was probably a pretty significant sight to behold. And here's these two girls with their dad going, there's no one left. Well, what are we going to do? Let's get dad drunk and we'll have babies. So then the Moabites are created. Well, so my speculation is that if Ham's wife was corrupt, and he obviously had some kind of personality trait that may have predisposed him to doing wrong, and which would make sense if what you read is true, if he's got some kind of genetics in there with a disobedience of Cain in there, then his first offspring pops out with 6 fingers, 6 toes, maybe double rows of teeth, and he's going, oh crap, and he's thinking, well, I can't go to my brother's wives because they're of the same stock, they're sisters. So who could I go to? And so it's my theory that the reason he decided to have sex with his mother was because she was the only genetically pure female alive to have sex with. And it's my opinion that Put was the offspring of that union. And Put's, I forget, I think his name means infirmity or something like that. But not all of Ham's children were Nephilim. The Canaanites were. The Jebusites, the Girgashite, all the ites that came out of the Canaanites, they were clearly, in fact, I can pull this up too, for those who are watching on YouTube. Hang on a second. So, the offspring, this is fascinating. The offspring of Canaan, we know that the names have meanings, right?
Yes.
And Chuck Missler took the names of the first 10 patriarchs, from Adam to Noah, and it says God has appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God, man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that with his death the despairing shall find rest. Like, that's the meaning of the names of the patriarchs from Adam to Noah, and that's the plan of the whole Bible.
Yes.
Like, give it in the names. And when I first saw Chuck Missler do that, I'm like, well, I wonder if that happens elsewhere, And sure enough, it does in a lot of places. Like, I don't have it in front of me here, but when you look at the Israelites, the 12 sons of Jacob, and put their name in their birth order, it tells an amazing story. And there are other times when the 12 tribes are mentioned, the fathers of the 12 tribes are mentioned, but not in the birth order. And I think the reason that is done that way is because when you put those together in sentences, it tells you a different sentence, a different paragraph. It's telling you another encoded story. Well, I've got on the screen the names of of Canaanites, right, in Genesis 10:6-20, and I'll just put them together in a sentence and read what those names mean. So all I'm doing is taking the meaning of the names in the order that they're given, taking the Hebrew names and looking up the meanings of those names, stringing them together. This is the paragraph that you end up with. He raged, a black terror, double straight, afflicted trafficker. I find that interesting, that trafficker, that's the word Canaanite means trafficker. So we talk about all, sex trafficking and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's Canaanite.
That's fascinating, yeah.
Trafficker. Black terror, drink thou anguish. Compass the chamber, thunder, compass the smiting. He who is coming, their love, we shall rebel. That's Nimrod right there. We shall rebel. A double straight firebrand. I looked up double straight. That means like twice as long. A twice as long firebrand, travailing, affliction of water, blades opening the moistened morsel, forgiven ones bowing to spy, a trafficker hunting terrors, trodden downsayers, the strangers draw near, showers of life gnawing like thorns, they shall break loose double woolen enclosures of wrath. Like that's the paragraph that you get from the offspring of Canaan. It's like, okay, like what possesses two proud parents and they just have a newborn baby and they look at it and they say, enclosure of wrath. What do you think, honey? Like,
right.
Why would parents name their kid Terror? Blades opening the moistened morsel. Like what?
Right.
That's a jacked up family tree right there.
Yeah, the first 10 generations of Cain also tells a story as well.
Do you know your head? I didn't look that up.
No, I don't remember it, but I did that study a long time ago. And it's sort of, like whereas the 10 generations of Adam are speaking of Christ and his mission to save us, the other is like connected to the Antichrist in some manner.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot to do that. I'm sure that's going to be fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, and for people who are interested in that, there's a book called A Dictionary of Scripture Proper Names by J.B. Jackson. You can just look that up, A Dictionary of Scripture Proper Names by J.B. Jackson. Actually, I can post a link in the chat room to there's an online version of it. But it's a great handy resource just to keep around with you, where you could just go look up all those names. It's a small little book, but all it is the names of everybody in the Bible and what the meanings of those names are. So anybody wants to play along and do that, they can. I just posted it in the chat room.
Yeah, that's a great resource.
So I say all that to say that whether or not what you read is true or what I believe is true, as long as the males are normal, and in this case it would be either Noah or Ham, you have 50-50 chance to have normal offspring. And plenty of Ham's children were normal. There's no indication of any. Put became the father of Libya. So and you look at all of his, there's no indication of giants in that offspring. There's no indication of natural born giants in Cush's line either. The Ethiopians. So Nimrod began to become a giant, but I believe he did so through genetic manipulation after the fact. He wasn't born that way. So the only ones that were natural born hybrid, monstrosities would be in Canaan, and at least one in Mitzrayim, and that's Caphtor. Caphtor and Cashluhim were offspring of Mitzrayim, and Caphtor settled the island of Crete. The island of Crete used to be known as the Caphtorites or the Caphtorim, and the Caphtorites, they became the fathers of the Philistines. And of course, we know some famous giants from the Philistines.
Right, yes.
So, and the other thing that intrigued me about all that was that all of Greek mythology originates in Crete. Well, there might be a reason for that, but all that to say that Ham had he certainly had quite a number of obvious giant Nephilim offspring, because we read about it in scripture as well as in extra biblical texts. But he also had plenty of normal children as well. And Japheth also had some giants, Gog and Magog.
Right, exactly.
So there was stuff. The only one of the three that didn't have any Nephilim genetics passed through was Shem. And we know that Shem of the three was the most righteous.
Right.
Following in the ways of Yahuwah. So it makes sense that 1,000 generations would be blessed and pure. So anyway, that's my thesis on all of that.
Let me share one passage before we go to break. This is from the Targum, and it's on the Genesis 9. And he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he made himself naked in the midst of his tent. And Shem, the father of Canaan, beheld the nakedness of his father, and showed to his brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a mantle and bare it upon the shoulders of each, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Well, I'll pick it up on the other side. We'll be right back for a final segment, everyone.
The seeker of lost paradise may seem a fool to those who have never sought the other worlds. Christ told us in Revelation 2, "Remember from whence thou art fallen, and do the first works." What many people don't realize about the fall of humanity is that Adam and Eve were initially bright-natured, and that they were placed into the garden of God to dress intendant, and that being deceived and tempted and eating from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that in that moment that you touch thereof you shall die, that they come under the authority of death in those moments, and since their fall have been banished from the place of the immortals. This concept becomes very clear in the work of the forgotten Edenic books of Adam and Eve. And as we study and read into this material, this knowledge will come to light, and it will help you to understand that being restored to our bright nature, our first estate through Christ, that the reason he had to take on embodiment and enter into mortal flesh form was in order to not only redeem the ancestors of Adam, the children of light, but also to rectify us and to restore us to our first estate in this manner, defeating death and bringing forth salvation with the promise of the cross.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Sacred Word Revealed
comes to Atlanta, Georgia
on September 11th to the 13th, 2020.
Purpose to reveal end-time mysteries.
To prepare the final generation,
we must don the full armor of God.
Featuring Zen Garcia,
Dr. Joy Pugh,
Rob Skiba,
Gary Wayne,
Yana Ben Nun,
Stephen Benoon,
Dr. Stephen Pigeon,
Zen Garcia,
Laurel Austin,
Nathan Reynolds. Buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com. bookofenoch.com.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
All right, welcome back everybody for a final segment. This show is flying by.
Wow, no kidding.
Right? And so what I'm going to share is the Targum version of what is Genesis 9, verse 22, where it says, "And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers without." And it says this, "And Shem, the father of Canaan, beheld the nakedness of his father and showed to his brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a mantle and bare it upon the shoulders of each, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned back, and the nakedness of their father they did not behold. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew by the relation of a dream what had been done to him by Shem his son, who was inferior on worth on account that he had not begotten a fourth son. And he said, Accursed is Canaan, who is his fourth son. A serving servant shall he be to his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, whose work is righteous, and therefore shall Canaan be a servant unto him. The Lord shall beautify the borders of Japheth, and his sons shall be proselytized and dwell in the schools of Shem, and Canaan shall be a servant to them. And Noah lived after the deluge 350 years, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died." And so I think that this verse is showing us that the Ham seeing the nakedness of his father, that the result of that was that Canaan was born, and that this is why Noah cursed him, and that even this prophecy, because this is what it turned out to be, as a prophecy, the Lord, as far as and blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, whose work is righteous, and therefore shall Canaan be servant unto him. This is exactly what was fulfilled in Joshua 9, when we see that there was this group that acted like they were from a far off place. And I'll read that story. "And when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done unto Jericho and to Ai, they did work willingly, and went and made as if they had been ambassadors, and took old sacks upon their asses, and wine bottles old and rent and bound up, and old shoes and clouded upon their feet, and old garments upon them, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua unto the camp of Gilgal, and said unto him, and to the men of Israel, We be come from a far country, now therefore make ye a league with us. And the men of Israel said unto the Hivites, Peradventure ye dwell among us, and how shall we make a league with you? And they said unto Joshua, We are thy servants. And Joshua said unto them, Who are ye, and from whence come ye? And they said unto him, From a very far country. Thy servants are come because of the name of the Lord thy God, for we have heard the fame of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites that were beyond Jordan, to Sihon king of Heshbon, and Og king of Bashan, which was at Ashtaroth. Wherefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spake to us, saying, Take victuals with you for the journey, and go to meet them, and say unto them, We are your servants, therefore now make ye league with us. This our bread we took for our provision out of our houses on the day we came forth to go unto you, but now behold, it is dry, and it is moldy. And those bottles of wine which we filled were new, and behold, they be rent, and these our garments and our shoes become old by reason of the very long journey. And the men took of their victuals and asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. So anyways, it's, Joshua and the princes agree to spare them. They make them servants and hewers unto the Levites, to the priesthood. And we see that later they usurp the priesthood and they become the Pharisees. And so this prophecy of the Canaanites becoming the servants of Shem was actually fulfilled. And that curse which Noah pronounced upon them was indeed fulfilled. And if, what the target is implying here, and if the writings of Abraham are if there's anything to that as far as Ham being from Nama, the seed of Cain, and it says in, let me pull that, in Leviticus 18:8, the nakedness of thy father's wife shall thou not uncover. It is thy father's nakedness. And so that is implying that Ham slept with his mother, Noah's second wife, who in this case I believe was Nama. And then if she is serpent seed and he born of Nama, the seed of Cain, was serpent seed himself, then that would definitely make Canaan, if he was in fact the result of this particular unholy copulation, that would be the preservation of the serpent seed post-flood. And it would make sense that being the predominantly serpent seed, that, it was that line which shows all the characteristics of this hybrid, Nephilim nature present. And, I agree with you that there was not a second incursion, but that this was passed on genetically. And it seems like these other manuscripts give us hint as to how possibly that preservation of the serpent seed was, was done. And perhaps this is, one of those things that people can consider with regard to, because even Christ said in Matthew 13, let both grow together until the time of the end. So the flood didn't just wipe out completely the children of Cain, neither the giants. We see that Og was said to be a remnant, and even his brother Sihon had survived the flood in some manner. And so these are things to consider from these other manuscripts.
So did I hear you right in whatever you were just reading, that it said Canaan was his fourth son?
Right. Yeah, Canaan. And that was, because it says also in the King James that Ham, the father of Canaan, but I don't believe that Canaan was yet born. It's just telling us that he was, because Canaan, I believe, is the result of him seeing the nakedness of his father and sleeping with his mother, that Canaan was the result of that birth, which is why Noah cursed him. And then that curse was to make the Canaanites servants unto Shem, which is exactly what happened. And they were the ones that usurped the land of Canaan from the Shemites. They went in and stole the land from Shem and his descendants, and that promise for the Abraham and his children to inherit that land was because the Canaanites had stolen it from Shem. And we can actually find confirmation of that in the Keber Nagast.
Okay, so the problem I would have with all that, though, is, well, first of all, the age of the Cain's Nama. That's a huge problem for me, because she's outliving Methuselah. Mm-hmm. That would be the first problem I'd have. And then the fourth born being Canaan, I'm like, well, Canaan was present for Noah to curse him. I mean, he said, "Cursed be Canaan." So to me, Canaan was there, and this is right after they got off the ark. I mean, it's shortly after they got off the ark, and Noah gets drunk, after the water has subsided, and they're only on the ark for a year, and they only had the 3 wives for 1 week before the flood. They got married 7 days before the flood. So none of the math works out for me. So this is why I say that I believe, if they got jiggy with it as soon as the water settled down a little bit, then Canaan could have been born on the ark or very shortly after they got off the ark, because they're on the ark for a year. So my problem with that idea would be chronology, age, and trying to make the numbers work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm thinking that perhaps Canaan wasn't born yet, and that what Noah is seeing is because Ham did sleep with his mother, that the result of that would be that Canaan would be born as a result of that conception.
But he curses Canaan as soon as he realizes what had been done. So like as soon as he was drunk and then he kind of fell asleep or whatever he did, when he woke up, he realized what had happened and he curses Canaan. So how would that work out? 9 months later, Canaan would show up.
Well, yeah. I'm just saying that maybe it is what he knows will be the birth of Canaan later. But I'm not 100. I'm just trying to interpret what I see in the scriptures and the Targum.
Yeah, I mean that goes to what we were saying at the beginning of this broadcast. It's like it's fine for both of us to be speculating like this because
right.
We admit it. We admit we're speculating, and there are texts that contradict each other. So
yes.
When we see texts that contradict each other, what's the litmus test, right? Well, I mean, for both of us, we're like, what does the canon say?
Yes, right.
The canonized text is our plumb line. We're going to go off of first and foremost. Anything else we read is either going to be accepted or thrown out, or just cool information to kind of fly away somewhere.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's what I know you do the same thing, but
right.
When I'm looking at and I'm just saying this for the audience's sake, if they're confused, it's like, well, how do you determine what the truth is? Well, I mean, whatever lines up the most with Scripture is what I think both of us would accept.
Right. Absolutely. Let me just share this one other passage from the Kebra Nagas, and this is about the Canaanites seizing the land from Shem, which again is, if you understand this portion, then you understand the promise that was given to Abraham, and also this prophecy that in Genesis 9. Now it was Canaan who rent the kingdom from the children of Shem, and he transgressed the oath of which his father Noah had made them to swear. And the sons of Canaan were 7 mighty men, and he took 7 mighty cities from the land of Shem and sent his sons over them. And likewise, he also made his own portion double. And in later days, God took vengeance upon the sons of Canaan and made the sons of Shem to inherit their country. These are the nations whom they inherited: the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, and the Girgashites. These are they whom Canaan seized by force from the seed of Shem. For it was not right for him to invade his kingdom and to falsify the oath, and because of this they ceased to be, and their memorial perished through transgressing God's command and worshiping idols and bowing down to those who were not gods. And after the death of Shem, Arphaxad reigned, and after the death of Arphaxad, Canaan reigned, and after the death of Canaan reigned, and after him Eber reigned, and then it just goes on.
Well, what were you just reading from?
The Kebra Nagas.
See, that's interesting because that also mentions Canaan, son of Arphaxad, because in the let's see, in Genesis 10, Canaan's missing. The Canaan from Arphaxad,
right,
is missing. Because in verse Genesis 10:24, it says, "And Arphaxad begat Selah, and Selah begat Eber." But in the Septuagint, I think, if I remember, I have to go back and look. But I know in Jubilees, and the text that the Kebra Nagas that you just read inserts a character named Canaan as an offspring of Arphaxad, which I've always found interesting. It's like, why did they throw him out? Well, I mean, in the Jubilees account, it said that he found writings of the Watcher after the flood, and it says he hid it from Noah and he sinned because of it, and that's all we get. Like, we're like, what? Give me more. I want more.
There's actually something very interesting now that you just said that. At the very end of this passage, it says, "And these are they who made magical images, and they went to the tombs of their fathers and made an image or picture of gold and silver and brass. And a devil used to hold conversation with them out of each of these images of their fathers, and say unto them, O my son so-and-so, offer up unto me as a sacrifice the son of whom thou lovest. And they slaughtered their sons and their daughters to the devils, and they poured out innocent blood to these filthy devils."
What is that from? Cabra Nagas?
The Cabra Nagas, yeah.
Wow, that's trippy.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the text from which the King James was translated omits that character.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
I'd like to maybe dive into that at some point and figure out why, when did the lying pen of the scribes decide to blot him out, and what was their reasoning for blotting him out? I mean,
right.
Well, because he's of Shem, that's he would be the problem child in the group,
Right.
So you have Shem, Arphaxad, Canaan,
Yes.
and you had Ham, Cush, Nimrod. So Canaan of Arphaxad would be first cousins with Nimrod. And so again, this is pure speculation. I mean, we're just looking at available text and trying to figure out how did this happen, right? And so we know that this character found writings of the Watchers and he sinned because of it. We don't know what that means. So I speculate and say, well, being first cousins with Nimrod, perhaps these two got together and they were looking at this stuff and they're looking over at their other cousins, the Canaanites that are just growing taller and taller and taller.
Mm-hmm.
You got sibling rivalry going on and saying, geez, I wonder if I could become a giant too. Maybe
right.
Yeah, maybe this text will help us out. Maybe Nimrod killed him, who knows? But Nimrod somehow got a hold of information that enabled himself to become a giant.
Gibborim, yes.
Gibborim. Now, in Hebrew, it's Gibborim, which can be translated giant and or could be translated simply as mighty man, strong warrior. Because David's mighty men were also Gibborim. But what I find really interesting is that when the Septuagint, the value of the Septuagint, when the Hebrew scholars came to that word Gibborim with David's mighty men and other similar cases, they chose the Greek word ton dynaton, which is like dynamite, powerful, strong warrior. But when they see and hear Genesis 10 regarding Nimrod, they chose gigantus, which is the word from which we get giant. They took the same Hebrew word, Gibborim. This is another reason why I constantly stress the value of the Septuagint, because they had a larger library of words to choose from. The Hebrew language, I think it's something like 8,000 words. I forget. It wasn't that many compared to other languages. So when they were translating from Hebrew into Greek, they had a much bigger pool of words from which to choose from. And they took that same Hebrew word and they historically, contextually knew the difference. Taking the same exact Hebrew word Gibborim and translating it as gigantus for Nimrod and ton dynaton for the warriors of David who were busy killing the gigantus.
Yes.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Well, we're not going to have time to go into. I was thinking of going into Joshua 6, but Joshua 6 is really long. It's a very long one. Oh, I did want to bring something else up though that you were mentioning. I think from the Cabra Nagas a few minutes ago, talking about we know that under Moses and Joshua, they were to wipe out the Canaanites, and Joshua and his boys did a really good job of it, but they didn't get everybody. And the ones that they failed to get, David and his boys took out, but even they didn't get all of them, and there were different remnants of the giants that remained in certain regions that incidentally are still hot spots in the world today that we're dealing with. But that there was a diaspora, as the Israelites were, purging the land of these creatures, they took off into the Caucasus Mountains and they crossed the oceans and made it to Peru and the Americas and all over the place. They went everywhere. But what I found really interesting was when I was looking at the construction of Solomon's temple, and because I was fascinated by, okay, why is it that the Freemasons and the Illuminati, those guys, they love Solomon's temple, and Solomon,
Yes.
like,
Right.
he's like their guy, I'm like,
Mhm.
I get it. I mean, Solomon, he started off okay, but he went off the deep end, and he supposedly had a ring and incantations and stuff to control humans to his will, and the Goetica and all the stuff that is associated with them. And when I'm looking into the construction of the temple and who he hired to build the temple and all that, do a screen share here for those who are watching on YouTube. They could go to my website, babylonrisingblog.com/CERN, capital CERN.html. I'll post that in the chat room. About 3/4 of the way down the page, I was talking about 1 Kings chapter 9, and in verses 20 through 21, it says, there were still some living in the land who were not Israelites, including Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Now, these are the same guys that are reckoned as giants, especially the Amorites, cedar tree sized dudes.
Right.
These were the descendants of the nations whom the people of Israel had not completely destroyed. So what happens next? So Solomon conscripted them for his labor force, and they serve in the labor force to this day. So he had giants in his labor force.
Right.
And they were used to build the temple. And then it gets even worse. You see in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14, that the nations were bringing, their wealth to Solomon for the purpose of building the temple. And the weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents of gold. So what? I'm like, it's the holiest thing, right? The temple of God.
Right.
That was built by Nephilim with 666 talents of gold every year. I'm going, oh man! To me, because I was like, what made this thing holy? Nothing. The only thing that made that holy is if you read the prayer of dedication. When Solomon finally completes the thing, and David wasn't allowed to do it. That was David's heart that wanted it.
Yes.
And God's like, well, you're a man of war, so I don't want my temple built. So Solomon was a man of peace. So it was built, under his reign. And when you read the dedication prayer that he prays when it's finally done, it's a beautiful prayer because he was still right. He was still walking in the path of his father, and everything was good. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but Yahuwah basically looks down and says, "Okay, dude, yeah, you did a good job. It looks nice. I appreciate your heart. Your prayer. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna put my name on this thing that you've created, and that will make it holy. But if you veer from my ways, and if you go after other gods, and if you do this, that, and the other thing, then I'm going to remove my name from this, and then all the repercussions and everything, that comes with whoring after other gods will happen, right?"
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the conclusion I came to is that the only thing that made that temple holy was Yahuwah's name on it. I'm like, this thing's built by Nephilim with 666 talents of gold every year. No wonder the Illuminati and Freemasons love the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it says that it was, built without any iron implements, and that if you read the Testament of Solomon, how he, given this ring, he was able to control the devils and the demons, and he conjured up all of them and asked them and gave them a part to play in the construction of the temple as he learned their weaknesses and their strengths and how to control them, and because I think that is also another reason why the Freemasons give a lot of credit to Solomon, was his ability to control, conjure, and invoke the demons and to interact with them. And that's part of the whole black magic ritual of what they do even in this day and age.
Yeah, I wrote that. This blog I wrote back in 2011, and I just under that part about the 66 talents, 666. I wrote, he had already known about the demon. I had already known about the demons built the Temple of Solomon theory based on other research I had done regarding the 72 Goetic demons spoken of in the Lesser Key of Solomon and the Apocryphal book Testament of Solomon. The text reads very similar to the plot for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And then I can talk about the Ring of Power and all that stuff. I mean, that's some crazy stuff.
It really is. Yes. And, there's also a portion of the story that a lot of people don't know about, is that when he had loaned out this ring to one of his pagan wives, and then one of the demons took possession of it and cast it into the sea, and Solomon was forced to wander, and he took over. I think it was Asmodeus. He took over reign and rulership of his Solomon's kingdom for 3 years as he wandered, and then he had married this other king's daughter and became a cook unto him, and then because she wanted to marry him, they were both forced out, and then while they were she purchased a fish, and cutting open the fish found the ring of Solomon in it, and so God gave him back the ring, and then he was able to take back his power in his kingdom. And then when he returned and he had this woman as his wife, the king came before him and realized that he was Solomon and that his daughter had married him as king. And so it's a really fascinating, incredible story, the full circle of it.
My precious. And I have to wonder, maybe Tolkien was, aware of all these things and he just stylized it.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the fullness of the story when it all comes out and you're able to see all the esoteric aspects of it as well. All right, brother. Another good show.
Yeah, see you back next week on my show.
Yep. God bless all.
Hi, my name is Ella, and I'm 10 years old. I'm one of the millions of children born.
Thank you everybody for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.